It's okay. I will study about this.
Well, Mr. Diogo, it was a pleasant hearing from you. I really appreciate hearing from anybody who's not an Ancap, and we've had a load of them today, which is a really nice change. It was always it was very pleasant and respectful. I encourage you, anytime that you have something you'd like to talk about, a challenge for us or a question, please feel free to call back in. We're going to move to the next caller, but before we do, I'd like you to have the last word.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to know the difference between the SEZs and the Uncapped Society, but I think this was enough for me.
Super. All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a good rest of the day, and we'll move on to our next caller now. Our next caller is Lewis. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Lewis, you're on the line. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I certainly can. And it sounds like you were, I think I caught in the chat that you had emailed Zulu at some point. So I'm going to let you just jump right in with your question, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I emailed Zulu personally because I was having a bit of a crisis because I've been looking at Ancap for quite a while now, and I looked at all the main principles, and I came from, like, I'm just about to enter college, like, which for the Americans out there is what you call it, junior year of high school, and so I've grown up with intersectional neo-Marxism basically baked in the system, and so I've basically come from that sort of area, and I've always been super libertarian. But I've always had one gripe which has really just like bothered me, and I'm sorry, you're probably not going to want to hear this name flopper, but it's actually something it was actually King Critical that brought it up.
Oh no, just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know you and him are in a bit of back and forth right now. You know.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, friendly back and forth, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it was that, you know how socialism and communism and fascism as well can only really be enacted through use of force, right? Well, how can realistically, how can this Ancap society really be enacted if not getting rid of the people that don't agree with you, i.e. people who believe there should be a state, people who support the state? Like, how can this actually be, you know, enacted? Do we promote like a consciousness of like how the state is bad? Because our institutions are just completely captured by neo-Marxists and have been since the critical theorists in the 50s. So, and in this new college that I'm going to right now, there is a Marxist reading club, but I mean, there's no bloody, you know, Rothbardian club where you look at objectivism and stuff like that and Austrian economics. So I suppose that's really my question of how can we get more people to be Ancap, and really, you know, how do we make this happen? If you know,
may I have a suggestion right off the bat? I'm assuming you're English, right?
Yeah.
So there is a UK Libertarian Party, at least as far as the Scottish Libertarian Party, I know they do regular meetups, and that kind of gave me a little bit of, like, you know, a morale boost. I would suggest just right off the bat, try to find other like libertarian meetups in your area or in areas you could go to, presumably with the UKLP. I've heard from the leader of the Scottish LP that they're all right. So definitely try to find your people. And if you can see them in real life, like they're actual flesh and blood human beings, it makes it a lot clearer. Like, okay, well, this isn't a permanent state of being for man. You can, in fact, have people who break through, and it can help you swallow that white pill. That, well, in fact, the neo-Marxists, they are a dying breed. They're not going to be able to continue without another Plato to give them a boost. They simply can't, because guess what? We've got this Ayn Rand, the holy figure, peace be upon her. She came along and she smited and answered all of the philosophies of the past and has set us out on a new route. And that new route, it can keep going unimpeded unless somebody else comes along who then has to be answered. When somebody else comes along who has to be answered, then I'll start blackpilling and start saying, we need to fucking solve this right now. But I am a massive proponent of the white pill because that has not happened yet. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
And
Yeah, I guess my problem with it is because I used to follow this guy on YouTube. He doesn't really do his he took down his politics channel actually because of he couldn't take people calling him this and that and the other. But he spoke of the utopian death cult, which is basically this idea that if you believe that that your principles are the right way to live and you follow them dogmatically, then I suppose the logical conclusion of that is that I suppose the ends justify the means of getting there. But I thought about it, and I'm like, all the authoritarian regimes that we've had, all the utopian death cults that we've had, they've all been on the side of order, not anarchy. They've all believed in the dialectic. Third positionists, communists, Marxists. And I suppose I'm like, how do I know that I'm not getting into my own sort of like, how do I know that I'm not getting into sort of like I don't know, my own sort of utopian death cult in a way where, all these ideas, because trust me, all these ideas, they sound appealing, but I think it's just the fear of being wrong, because I've seen how dogmatic and butthurt the Marxists get whenever I talk to them. But I don't want that to be me, I guess.
Well, I really hope that you don't make a decision about. I mean, it can be really difficult for you to persist on your path if you perceive that your ideological team, let's say, is akin to a death cult. That's a big hazard, and I think the most important thing to start off with for you there is to say, what's right is right, and we can't determine these things based on their popularity. Certainly, you must realize that our opponents want you to be trying to make your decision about what you're going to label yourself as and what you're going to participate in. They want you to be making that decision based on popularity, because they want to do everything in their power to make you feel like you're unpopular. That's why so often, like Zulu and myself, we're not trying to play a victim card here, but we're subject to basically constant abuse online daily. Some days are worse than others, but it's pretty much unending. And I really truly believe that they're doing that because they want us to think that we're unpopular and that they want us to make our decisions that way. But right and wrong isn't connected to that. Unfortunately, it seems to me, and this is maybe a little anecdotal, it seems to me that what is right is very seldom what is easy. Maybe it's never what's easy. And I think I gravitate towards people who are of the idea, the philosophy, let's say, that anarcho-capitalism is an idea that they reached not because it was popular, but because they really thought about it and they're convinced of it for good reasons. And having reached that point of view, they are going to fight for it, whether it's not even just if they think it's popular, but whether they're going to succeed or not. It's worth fighting on the side of truth and justice, let's say, regardless. And so I think that is a much more grounding perspective to have on that. And I would recommend, if you feel those thoughts creeping in, do whatever you can, including reaching out to us if you have to push them away. I hope that that's been somewhat relevant to your question. But in case it wasn't, I want to hand it over to Zulu, and then Zulu, if appropriate, let's see what I have a feeling that both of our co-hosts here have gone through the process of becoming libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. So I'd love to see what they might offer on this topic as well, because I think it can be. Just for record, we have a channel in our Discord just called the White Pill Triage, and that only exists because it can be really hard to maintain the white pill sometimes. So Zulu.
Yeah, so sorry. Can you repeat the question? I just had like a weird smell, and I thought somebody was cooking chicken nuggets in my house for a second there. So I had to if somebody had broken in.
To be honest, I forgot my question as well. But
I think you were essentially asking us. The implication I was getting was about the white pill, right? Like, how do you keep from pushing away this idea that Ancap is just another dime a dozen, fringe radical cult, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it is like the total polar opposite of what we had in the 20th century. So basically communism, fascism, and Nazism. The third way. But it's just like the fear of like I know that I know like the objectivism and stuff like that, but it's just like that constant kind of feeling of what if I'm wrong? What if all these ideas that I'm taking in, what if they just lead to, I don't know, Somalia or something like that? What if the Marxists actually have a point? And I know that's absurd, but I think it's more to do with a mental health issue rather than anything else. It's definitely not based in logic, but it's more so centered around, well, how is this actually going to happen? How am I going to be able to convince people to believe in the NAP and read Ayn Rand and all that sort of thing, instead of just listening to what the person with a septum ring down their bloody nose says.
I think. Sorry. You go ahead. You've been trying to stop for so long.
No, it's all good. One of the callers earlier, when mentioning the SCZs, I think an incredible white pill is that we know that private institutions and the private alternative outperform the state alternative, and implementing these systems would necessarily make the state increasingly less necessary. So it's wow. I completely forgot what my last point was, but yeah,
well,
sorry.
We cut you off too much. Maybe if you remember it.
Yeah, no, I had it all in my head, and then it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, so I think a great thing. The caller, apologies, I forgot your name, Louis or something. I think a great thing you could do is go through. There's this series on YouTube called "The History of Philosophy," or maybe called "The History of Western Philosophy," by Leonard Peikoff. It's this lecture series. It's the lecture series that convinced me of objectivism. He goes through, and I think it's very important to see the progression of the history of philosophy, because I think that can disabuse you of a lot of these notions that like this could be something like the Marxists. You can see the logical progression of how each idea leads into the next, and you can see how a lot of it is just complete subversions, and how you can kind of rise above that. I think that would be a very positive experience for you.
And I remember something Zulu said to me is that our system is actually the one that creates a high trust society and a low time preference society. So that's also another white pill that we can recognize it to be true.
Yeah, I just don't want to make the the Marxist mistake of which will lead to loads of violence, as we've already seen. Like, I remember there was that UK journalist who I think he was in Paris or something, and Antifa saw him, and he didn't do anything wrong, and they just beat him up like for no reason. And I see this increasing like violence like day by day, and in my current schools, of like people feeling justified to initiate aggression on the left. And so when you take an opposite view of the libertarian view instead of the authoritarian view, it's very isolating, especially in this day and age. And you kind of think, oh well, I could be a robot like them, but something is holding me back and staying in this kind of anarcho-capitalist libertarian position. And yeah.
So are you concerned about violence being inflicted against you, or are you more concerned about that you're in a movement that itself is going to become violent? I want to clarify that.
The second.
Well, that is an interesting one for sure, because I've definitely heard from like libertarian types who promote violence. Very rarely, but I have heard from them. But anarcho-capitalism, I think, is not the same kind of umbrella that you can find with libertarianism. I think if you go to a libertarian convention, you're going to find the type of prepper who's just waiting to blow up a post office. We meet them, especially like myself being involved in actual politics. It's just they're out there. But anarcho-capitalism is something specific, and I don't think that the essential elements of it that are specific, I don't think they lend themselves to becoming violent. Now, of course, there's a sort of possibility that the anarcho-capitalist movement becomes hijacked by people who are violent, and then that ends up developing that way. I suppose that's not an impossibility. But if you don't want to be somebody who participates in violence, especially aggressive violence, we certainly don't. I think everybody here on the panel, we all consider violence a severe abhorrence. You want to be grounded in a philosophy that is going to give you a good result on that. I mean, I'm not necessarily recommending that you philosophize backwards from the result you want, but just as a matter of for the nearsighted purpose of reassuring you, anarcho-capitalism, I'm very confident, is the best philosophy out there for keeping you from ever becoming an aggressor. I want to hear from Anarcho-Econ and then maybe Flappa about what they think about this conversation so far.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the ANCAP movement potentially getting violent, I'll say if we ever have a violent quote unquote ANCAP movement, we've lost the movement. It's almost like those kind of big tent libertarians who advocate for like kind of middle of the road, like just kind of nothing burger compromise policies. It's like once we start doing that, we've lost the movement, So if you have this this violent group of supposed ANCAPs, I think that they're not really ANCAPs anymore. And as long as we're being consistent, I don't think you're really ever going to get violence, aggression, really violence maybe, but aggression as the answer to some sort of problem. And if you do, then I don't think we're really being ANCAPs in that respect anymore. If we get that as an answer.
If I can extrapolate your question, are you concerned with how ANCAPs would respond to violence? Is that?
Well, I suppose it's just like on how to achieve an ANCAP society, really, with if you're going to convince the masses of people, because obviously I had to look in depth, because when I was I'm still in high school, but when I was looking at all these movements, all these political movements, the big ones, that's not the status quo of what we have now, they all kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, turn to shit. And and it's just I suppose just the intrusive fear that I have that either it's going to be violent in order to take control, or it's just a fantasy, and we're never going to be able to convince people of our principles, I guess.
I'd hate to hear. I don't want that to hang on a silence in response. Somebody jump in here. I know all four of us have just got pockets full of white pills for totally legal reasons, and we're just dying. We just don't know which one is the most effective one to give you.
Yeah, I'm just doing some deep contemplation, so I don't mean to be silent in response to him.
I mean, I can say it seems like there's a bit of a strategical aspect to your question. It's like, how do we overcome this massive mountain of socialism? And I mean, I think you brought up earlier all of these intellectual institutions like the colleges and whatnot that you're looking at, they have like Marxist reading groups, and they have like all the professors are like Marxists. It's like, well, they did that specifically by, I mean, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I know I certainly do. Liquid Zulu certainly does believe in the remnant strategy. So they convinced the philosophers, and these philosophers propagated out into the institutions like the schools and whatnot, and that's how they've been kind of convincing the normies, right? They've kind of been just passing down this philosophy to the normies. So fundamentally, I think our task is to convince these philosophers, right, these thought leaders, and pass on our philosophy to them. And so if I don't think you should be too concerned, maybe concerned is the wrong word, too scared by this massive mountain of socialism, because that's not, overcoming that isn't the task, right? We don't need to go in and convince every normie to vote for Ron Paul, because that's not really the fundamental task. I think the fundamental task is convincing the remnant, and it'll come downstream from there that these normies will kind of accept our philosophy implicitly without really, they might not directly question it, but they'll, it'll just be passed down to them essentially.
I will add on to that.
Consciousness.
Like, things can change a lot faster than most people realize. Like, let's take the example of the Soviet Union. Lenin had a minority of political power in the Soviet Union, and he took that minority of political power and used it. Sorry, not the Soviet Union, the pre-Soviet Union. He used that minority of political power that he had and turned it into taking control of the largest country on earth. And that happened very quickly in the span of single people's lifetimes that occurred. If you think about our movement, where did we really start? Well, we started with about a dozen or so people in Murray Rothbard's living room 60 odd years ago. And now it is constantly being talked about. Constantly, politicians, especially in America, are trying to kowtow to the libertarians at election time. They're saying, okay, libertarians, of course we love the libertarians. You always hear this type of thing. It took us 60 years to get from a dozen people in Murray Rothbard's living room to the president of Argentina actively saying that he is a supporter of some of these beliefs. That is an extraordinary trajectory, if you think about it. Think of what we can achieve in another 60 years after that, and another 60 years after that, and so on and so forth. Like, if you think about it, the progressives, the leftists, they're just kind of running on inertia at this point. They already won the philosophical argument quite some time ago, and we're seeing them slowly decline over the years. People are taking them less seriously as time goes on, and they need a new great man, in effect, to revive the philosophy. They need their third Plato, second Plato, of course, being Immanuel Kant. They need a new figure like that in order to respond to the Aristotelian Ayn Rand, or else they just are destined to fail. That's just how it goes.
Well, it's in the colleges especially. It's the midwits that they prey on, and that's what I'm thinking about. It's the people who can take. It's the people that can take in information, but can't really think for themselves. That's what I've noticed. In
it's worth noting on that description, those people aren't thinking for themselves. We describe these people as normies, right? What is the defining trait of the normie? They follow the norms. Okay, so who produces those norms? The philosophers. So all we've got to do is win over the class of philosophers. Class, in quotations. And you do that by having the correct arguments. In fact, the current philosophy establishment, this is how broken it is. A lot of them don't even consider Ayn Rand a philosopher in the first place. So of course they're not going to give any sort of proper refutation of her ideas. And if they're not going to do that, then they're doomed. They're quite frankly doomed. They will not be able to keep convincing people. And so, the people who matter, that is. And so, then what happens to all these downstream people? Well, they just adopt the new philosophy of the day. They're followers. They're not thinkers. They're sheep. We just need to control the you. EWE. We control the you, and then everything follows from that.
Well, like you said, they're sheep, aren't they? And so they're bound to stick together. Like, to me, when I look in society, there are outcasts, there are normies, and then there are the conformists, the people who are outwardly trying to, prove themselves to the postmodern, I suppose, neo-Marxist narrative that we've created in these institutions. And if you look at them, they are all one. There is no individuality there whatsoever. So I'm just wondering, like, how we can convince these people, or maybe how do we even convince them when they've been programmed to be orientated around a collectivist narrative?
Well, so the fundamental insight of Albert J. Nock in his essay Isaiah's Job is that it's in fact not important to convince those people. Those people are entirely unimportant to convince. You don't want to be doing the job of the shepherd, who is constantly trying to herd the sheep over to your side. And if you miss a couple, then they just get herded over by somebody else. Let the communists do the herding. We don't care about that. Let them spend all their energy on doing that. What is important is he highlights this through the story of the prophet Isaiah. What did the prophet Isaiah do? All he did was he stood up there on the step each day, and he just spoke the message. He said, the end is coming, or whatever the fuck it is that it is in the story. And God tells him, well, gather this remnant. Just say the message each day. You'll gather a certain remnant. He's like, you fucking idiot. There's a remnant out there, Isaiah. You're going to gather this remnant, and they can be saved. And indeed, the masses, most people, they'll boo him. They'll make fun of him. Doesn't matter. Just say the message. And you can get a very clear example of this actually happening with the Ron Paul campaign. I recommend you look into some of these interviews they do of Ron Paul on TV, of him just being utterly based, and the people will literally get up out of their chairs to go scream and go like, how dare you? You know, I think some guy was like, came up and he was like, well, you know, Mr. Paul or Dr. Paul or whatever. What about people who shouldn't the government come in and stop you from doing drugs? And he's like, well, I mean, you're a little fat. Why don't the government come in and stop you from being so fat? Everybody hated that. That is Isaiah's job. That is the Isaiah's job strategy, is to just say these controversial, radical ideas without apology. And you gather the people who are important, the thinkers. You gather those people. They respect that because they also don't like the normies.
Yeah, I feel like in the institutions, like when I was looking at university, it's that it feels like it's just so full of people who are just ready to take on board Marxist ideas, and that it just kind of puts you off. So I don't really know where you know the other critical thinkers are. I can just, well, I suppose the only real source is here, the internet. But it seems like they've all kind of scattered, mainly because we've just been, you know, driven off because the institutions, they're no longer, you know, for critical thinking.
If I can offer something that perhaps will be useful to you, I've been through university myself. I have a degree, and I had the same experience that you're describing. I mean, anyone who's a regular viewer here knows that I have no shortage of stories about how some of the persecution I faced was basically comedic levels of like just ridiculous things. And I want you to know that I found that university absolutely 100% was just a completely irredeemable cesspool. It was just, words would not adequately describe how bad it was. Yet, ever since I've left university, I've found the world to be much more open to libertarianism and, you know, things like the non-aggression principle. I think the university wants to suck you in a little bit. I mean, if you think about it, maybe you didn't have this experience, but when I was growing up and I was still a child, I was often under the impression the entire time that there was nothing in the world except getting into university. All the jobs were on the other side of going to university. The whole point of getting up in the morning was to get to good grades so you could go to university. That's what the school I was in was constantly telling me. There's a lot of pressures that try to make you think subconsciously, explicitly, subtly, that university is really, really important. It actually isn't. There are a bunch of parasites. I feel like a cliche for saying that, but like almost everybody you meet in university is somebody whose whole world is to justify grants so that they can continue to live off grants. That's all that they do. I had many professors tell me, I had one professor in particular tell me in no uncertain terms that despite being a scientist, his purpose was not to discover anything about the real world. His purpose was to produce works that would facilitate more government expenses on minorities. That was what his role was as a professor in his eyes. Now, for him, he didn't mean racial minorities. He meant marginalized people in a psychological sense. So like neurodivergent people, which is equally as bad in my mind. But despite all those pressures that are out there to try and make you think that university is very important, I just don't think that it is. I think I've made much more money. I've been much more productive. I've had a much better life ever since I wasn't involved in university. And of course, if you are trying to be in a career path where you have to be in university, then that's a little bit tougher for you. That's a pill that you may have no choice but to swallow. But I think that even if you're going to be forced to go through the university, you should remain grounded in the idea that the university is not as important as they want you to think, and that the broader world out there is full of people who prefer cooperation over coercion and are very amenable to the ideas of libertarianism. I feel like my voice is going there. Before we go here, we're going to have to tie it up soon. I certainly want to give my co-hosts the opportunity to say a little bit more on this. But I found it a little bit difficult to narrow down a specific concern. I wonder, Lewis, if you would help me out here, could you summarize what the concern is so that we might try to offer you something that's very, A to B, your concern, and we can give you a response that applies directly to something specific?
Yeah, sure. So how do we get to how do we spread the word of anarcho-capitalism to actually make this happen with knowing that all the institutions are basically out there to destroy it?
Well, I mean, how did you learn about it? Presumably, you saw about it on social media, somebody posting about it. That's what we got to do. We just got to keep doing that. It's something Adrian told me. He was mentioned before. He's the Springtime of Nations guy. He told me before I came around, the general perception within libertarianism was, oh, they're an objectivist. They're probably just some sort of war hawk or something. Until I come around, and that perception is flipped. It is possible for a person to come along and flip these perceptions without, an enormous amount of funding or, working themselves to the bone necessarily. It is possible for that perception to flip. That is how we can do this. We can just actually push this philosophy, which is the most beautiful philosophy ever created. And people want to hear that type of message. They really do. At least the people who matter do.
So if these libertarian parties get, say, more and more big and people get more and more attracted to them, do people just increasingly see the state as utterly redundant, and more and more people just choose to, I don't know, not pay tax or something like that? Is that how it?
Or even just, in order to protect itself, the state will have to relent and provide increasing levels of liberalization. Now, the particular steps, they're kind of secondary for us. What is fundamental is this preaching of the message. If you just keep doing that, then eventually the society you want happens, assuming you're correct in your message.
Let's take it to Anarcho-Econ and Floppa for some closing remarks.
Well, with respect to this kind of question of how do you almost find the remnant, I'm actually going to commit a crime and ask a question on top of this, because as a content creator myself, I'm lucky enough to have 3 fellow content creators in this call with me. I sometimes struggle thinking, what kind of videos should I be producing to find the right people? And so I almost want to ask anyone who wants to chime in, what kind of topics do you think we should be addressing? What kind of content should we be making? Just any general thoughts on that kind of thing, because I'm kind of with Lewis on this one. I mean, obviously I have a lot of white pill hope for the future, but I'm kind of uncertain on exactly what the method we should go about is.
So if I could field that, I'm a big proponent of specialization. You should focus on those topics that are most of interest to you, because then you're going to present them in the best possible way. And more broadly, for instance, I decided that I wanted to start targeting more heavily people who watch YouTube on their TV, because the ad revenue bonuses are if you're on your TV, you're far less likely to be swiping away, So I started trying to edit around targeting those people in particular. And you can do the same for philosophy. If you just make the best videos you can make on the topics that are most of interest to you and try to get your arguments as tight as possible, then there's this beautiful thing called the YouTube algorithm. It's going to figure out who will resonate with that, and it will send them to you. You can kind of just lay back and let it happen. If people click on your video and watch it, YouTube's going to recognize that, and they're going to send it out. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. You'll be definitely aware of how that stuff works. But just for the audience in general.
I've been a full-time YouTuber myself. I don't mean this project. I mean, I've actually been somebody who's making a full-time income doing YouTube. One thing I think that's supplemental to that needs to be very strongly considered is you need to do something that you can sustainably do, because the money won't keep you doing it. You need to make sure that you preserve your enjoyment of the topic with a great deal of care, because it's very easy to find yourself rapidly burning out. And then you could have the best strategy in the world, but if you burn out, it's for nothing. It'll do you no good. So I think that that's something that you should be mindful
By the way,
of.
have you ever revealed what your other channel was?
Only to other content creators. I never publicly
Yeah.
did. It's easier for me that way.
It's a great channel.
Thank you.
But
I
yeah.
hope you find that useful.
Yeah,
Oh, but what I was
sorry.
sorry.
My bad.
Yeah, I think we all can agree here that like institutional opposition in general is like a big problem. But I think one of the best things about the modern day is that we do have this now massive decentralized communication platform or platforms. And so I think ultimately our goal shouldn't be to, win over these bad institutions, but to more or less reduce people's dependency on them by, creating alternatives to them. So ultimately it would make the existing institutions more obsolete over time. That may not be the best way to phrase that, but I would be interested in at least one other person's thoughts here on that.
I was just going to say, I mean, especially if you live in the UK, I'd say secondary schools, basically high schools, they are basically fascist institutions. They do not care about the individual student at all. I mean, they even have their own minister of propaganda, head of DEI. And, I've been suspended and even excluded for many occasions, simply, speaking out against it. I remember there was this one teacher who said, oh, in Marxist countries, there's no suffering. She literally said that and then went on to the next line. And I was there having severe, my brain was, I felt like, I was in some kind of trance because I thought, oh, this can't be real. And then I challenged her on it and said, oh, you can't challenge me on this. Apparently I was doing it in a rude way. Then I got sent out. I may have said something
Apparently
about
ruder than advocating the death of all of the bourgeoisie. Apparently ruder than that.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I have to say we've got a surprise. Another socialist is calling into the show, so we really have to move on because we're at the capstone here. We're going to do a surprise little extension. It'll be an interesting one, I promise. Lewis, thanks so much for calling in with this. It's been an interesting chat. I hope that we can hear back from you soon, and hopefully you'll join the Discord and let us know if you're finding that you're navigating the situation with some efficiency. Of course, if you ever need any further, you want to talk to any of us about this, you can always reach us on Discord. We're all very available. But we're going to call it for here. Would you like to have the last word, Lewis, before we move on?
Yeah, thank you so much for thank you so much for having me. And Flopper, I love you, man. Keep up the great work. I hope you can. Are you going to do that debate with the King Critical?
Yes, yeah. I'll just say, yeah. I won't be not transparent about it, but I hope to.
Yeah,
if he agrees. I'm pretty sure he has.
Good. That'll sure be some entertainment. Anyway,
hopefully we can get him on here. we'll host it on this channel. That'd be fantastic. All right, Lewis, thanks so much. We all hope that we can hear from you again soon. Best of luck. We'll keep